Wagwan, my G's, F-Dog here, presenting you your first lesson through Microsoft Teams. First thing we're going to look at today is energy sources. Okay, so we've just finished cardiovascular system, so we're now moving into energy sources and how they provide energy for us to move and how we resynthesize ATP. So the first thing we're going to look at is the different energy sources that I use to support an energy system. Okay, so energy support sources support an energy systems, to which we have three. Okay, so the first thing we're going to look at is ATP. This stands for adenosine triphosphate. Your exam tip for this would be the only way I can move is by breaking this down, okay? And we'll get to that at some point, right? So that is the only way we can move. All these energy sources, number 2 through 6, are broken down in order to resynthesize ATP. So that's one thing you need to remember. So the first energy source we're going to look at is phosphocreatine, or we have seen it as PC. This is our most rapid release of energy, and it'll only work for 5 to 8 seconds. Okay, so after 5 to 8 seconds of our highest intensity ballistic movements, we run out of phosphocreatine. Okay, this supports what we would call the ATP-PC system. Okay, and we'll get to that later on. Once I've run out of phosphocreatine, I would then move into using glycogen and glucose. Now I want you to think about where glycogen and glucose come from, is they come from carbohydrates. Fine. Now, then these can provide energy for 2 different energy systems, and it's going to come in with fats and triglycerides. But the first thing that's going to happen is when glycogen is broken down, it gets broken down into glucose, then glucose will get broken down again. So carbohydrates will support what we would call the lactate anaerobic system. Now that is going to provide energy for us from 8 seconds to around 3 minutes. Okay, so let's say I'm sprinting as far as possible, as fast as possible, okay, in like a 400-meter race. Phosphocreatine, when I drive out the blocks, will be used to resynthesize my ATP, and when I run out of that, I'm going to then start to use this as an energy source for potentially the rest of the race. Okay, now both of these systems are anaerobic, which means that they don't use any oxygen in order to break these down. Okay, and they use enzymes, which we will get to kind of later in another lesson. Now let's say I'm running a marathon. Okay, I still would use glycogen and glucose. All right, however, a marathon takes more than 3 minutes, which means I'm also going to have to use my fats, and we associate them with a lower intensity, more sustained exercise. So this allows me to access aerobic respiration, which allows me to provide energy kind of forever. Okay, as long as you have fats in your system, you can use it as an energy source. So these are our 3 main ones we're going to use. However, let's say I use all of these. I would then use my protein, okay, or amino acids. This isn't a good thing, okay? However, I can use it if I was to run out of these 3 things. Okay, so it only gets used when everything else is depleted. Fine. Then last of all, we've got this lactic acid. Now we always talk about lactic acid as a bad thing. So when I finish exercise, lactic acid will stay in the muscle, it'll be in the blood, and eventually it gets shuttled away, right? And it converts it back into things such as protein. It will convert it into glycogen, okay, and other energy sources. So actually, while I will not directly use it during exercise, it is still an energy source, because then I can bring it back eventually into other energy sources. Okay, so now we apply this to a question, it may say identify, all right, which is AO1, the main energy source is used in a 400 meter sprint. Okay, it may ask me, it might be a 2 marker, it may want multiple. So in your brains now you've got to think, well, how long does it last? Well, first of all, will it use ATP? Well, everything uses ATP, so yes. Does it use phosphocreatine? Well, does it last 5 to 8 seconds? Yes, it takes about a minute. And last of all, well, glycogen and glucose, my carbohydrates, well, does it last longer than 8 seconds? Yes. And is it not as long as 3 minutes? Well, yes, like I said, it takes about 1 minute, which means my answer would be ATP, phosphocreatine, glycogen. That is all you would have to say, because the question said identify. However, let's say it says for a marathon runner, they would still use ATP, they would still use phosphocreatine for maybe a sprint finish, they would still use glycogen and glucose for higher intensity periods, and they would also use fats and triglycerides, because it can last forever, longer than this 3 minutes. Okay, that's kind of the energy sources, and now we're going to move into how they apply to energy system.